You made it through another intro. Maybe you've seen the looped one, maybe you haven't, maybe you care, maybe you don't, maybe you don't even watch these, so why am I talking to you? It doesn't matter. But we're in energy sources now, and if you're in honors, that's going to be important because it's the first of 2 units that are going to be crucial to your honors project. If you're not in honors, that's okay too, you still got to learn it, so we might as well go through them together. Anyway, what do we need to know about energy? Well, like every unit, we are going to start from the beginning. And the beginning of this is about 300 million years ago, a long time in the past, in what geologists call the Carboniferous period. Well, carbon is going to be important. Remember that carbon is on the periodic table. It's number 6. It's going to be important as we move through these next couple of units, and then kind of through the rest of science, depending on how far you want to go. Why is it important now, though? Well, back then, 300 million years ago, the climate is not like it is today, and the continents are not where they are today due to tectonic movement, due to the plates movement. We're going to get into that in the lithosphere, so don't worry about that, but I'm sure you've talked about it before. But we have glaciers that have been retreating for millions of years, and now we have a lot of land that has the ability to grow these new forests and trees and plants and shrubs and all sorts of stuff like that. And kind of it looks sort of like Jurassic Park, like the movies. You know, they're not all wrong. It's better named Cretaceous Park, but that's neither here nor there. Most of you don't care. But we have this new thing called lignin. And what is lignin? Well, it's going to be in the bark of these trees, these fern-like trees. And as we hit through our evolutionary traits and our evolutionary path of different things, we're still developing today. Evolution doesn't stop. But at this point, we're a little ahead of the game on things that can break down this lignin. And that's going to be incredibly important because that's going to be the basis of our fossil fuels, which is the first type of energy that we're going to talk about. Nothing yet really wants to break this. Nothing yet can break this stuff down. There's no bacteria. There's no fungus. There's no plants or animals. Nothing yet can grow. Or nothing yet can knock it down. So it keeps growing. There's no limiting factor. And when we get to biosphere, the last unit, we're going to talk about what limiting factors are, but right now, all you need to know is it's kind of in the name. It's a factor that limits growth. So because we have this, we have excess photosynthesis compared to today going on. Well, what does excess mean? Well, we're going to get into what our current levels of gases in the atmosphere are, and you're going to figure out that nitrogen is actually the most prevalent gas in the atmosphere. It's not oxygen. You might think it's oxygen since that's what we breathe. But back then, oxygen was up to 35%, way higher than what it is today. And bugs, arthropods is what we call them, could grow to like 2 and 3 feet in wingspan, which is a lot larger than, like the 6-inch dragonflies, 4-inch dragonflies we might see today. That is because oxygen is everywhere at this time span, which is allowing the growth of all these different types of plants and animals, flora and fauna, as we call them in science. But like all things, it came to a swift, abrupt end. This is due to a really quick but really intense ice age. And this ice age just wipes out 50 million years of growth. That's a lot of things that can grow. Think about what grows in a lifetime, 50 to 100 years. Now, that's 50 million years. Think about all the stuff that can grow in that time span. So we have all this lignin, this stuff that can't be broken down. It gets buried into swamps and marshlands and bogs and all sorts of stuff like that, which is kind of, where we find some of our fossil fuels today. And it goes under heat and pressure. And heat and pressure is going to be a key concept, so remember that because it's going to come back up again later when we get to rock cycle, which is in a couple more units. But over these millions of years afterwards, until we get up to present day, this heat and pressure and this compaction and everything is going to form the basis of our fossil fuels on top of all that carbon compound that's having all these processes done to it. So where are they today? Well, the first one we're going to talk about is coal. And coal can be found in what we call, modern day anyway, North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. Now, that's not necessarily everywhere we can find it. You can find them, a little bit of everywhere, but these are going to be our huge deposits. As we get up to modern day, though, there's a period of history that's going to be really important, and it's going to be crucial to why fossil fuels are even used to the amount that they are today. So Marco Polo, yes, that Marco Polo, is making his voyage around the world, and he sees that China, as China often was first and kind of beat Western scientists to things, we kind of forget about that in Western history, but that's a whole different discussion for a whole different day, and if you want to have that discussion, we can. It's a good one, it's important, but right now that's not the main topic. And they kind of, this voyage, this Marco Polo voyage, brings it back to Europe. What is that? Coal. Well, it's important, and it's, going to be the basis of a lot of our steam engines. But they hadn't really been invented yet. The ideas have been thought up. Da Vinci has his steam engines and his helicopters and all this stuff, hundreds of years before that. But they hadn't really actually been made into, reality. Finally, they do, though. And we have our trains and our steamboats and our machinery powered by steam engines. They need something to run them. They need some energy. And what do we have? Coal. The Industrial Revolution of the late 19th century, the late 1800s, is when we see this just absolutely skyrocket. That's when fossil fuels are really going to hit their heyday, and they're going to take off and find out where they go. Well, we still use them today, some 200-ish years later, so they're pretty important, but we don't use them for trains or steamboats or anything like that today. So what do we use them for? Turn the lights on, recording this video, listening to music, electricity. The majority of coal today is used for electricity generation. And we can use that all over the world. And we do use that all over the world. In the West, in the East, down in Australia, everywhere uses coal to power its power plants. Now we're changing, and we're going to get into that when we talk about natural gas and renewables and nuclear energy and all that stuff. But coal is really the main driver, and it's what the predominant source of our energy is, as, before we get to nuclear and natural gas. How do we get it out of the ground, though? It's in the ground. We know it's in the ground. We know we want it up into the power plants that we use. So how do we get it there? Well, there's a couple different ways. There's surface and subsurface mining. So a couple different ways of surface mining. Well, we can have open pit mining, and that's literally, science. I'm going to say it now. I'm going to say it a lot. Science has a lot of boring names from things. And you might think, well, why don't they make it sound cooler? Or maybe you don't even think that because you don't care. But why don't we make names in science sound cooler? Why? Why do they need to be? They should just tell you what it does. There doesn't need to be any guessing. So science has boring names because we want to be as straightforward as we can, so we don't have to kind of remember why we named it that. Open pit mining is a pit that's open, and we mine from it. Pretty straightforward, right? Strip mining is when you take strips of the ground away and you then go and mine underneath it. Again, pretty straightforward. Mountaintop removal. Yeah, you got it. Mountaintop removal, though, is going to be kind of a hot topic here in North Carolina because our mountains are a great source of tourism and money in the financial status of Western North Carolina. And so when mining companies go in and they start removing tops of the Blue Ridge and the Appalachians and the Smoky Mountains, a lot of people are going to get upset about it. Now, we're going to get into a little bit later about why, pros and cons, because everything has a pro and a con. And there's pros and cons to fossil fuels, there's pros and cons to nuclear, and there's pros and cons to renewable. So it's important to weigh all of these out. You shouldn't just jump on one of these trains and then, continue to ride that train through the entire energy spectrum. You have to weigh them out and see what makes the most sense for you. But the second one, subsurface mining, is probably the one that if I asked you to describe coal mining, it's what you would think of. It's in the movie October Sky, or, it's kind of just synonymous with what we think of as West Virginia. But it turns out West Virginia is not the biggest coal reserve in the United States. But this subsurface mining, you basically dig these tunnels and these mine shafts underground, and you go through it, and you get it out of the ground, but the process can be really, really dangerous. As the conveyor belts, we don't use those carts and mules or anything anymore, as those conveyor belts and the machinery kind of shake the coal up to the surface, it knocks off these loose carbon particles and this soot. And eventually miners, if they're not wearing the correct respiratory equipment, or if their company hasn't given them the correct equipment, or if they're just down there and they're not lucky enough, they can develop what we call black lung. And as you can see, as you go through the PowerPoint, and we'll talk about it a little bit in class, the more that carbon deposit ends up in your lungs, it basically takes that soft tissue and hardens it up, and you can't breathe. It's like being permanently asthmatic, and there's nothing you can do about it. And unfortunately, it is the cause of death for a lot of miners. Now that's, one downside, and it's one of a couple of downsides that we're going to get to more specifics of in class. but the US needs its energy, and if we're gonna say we can't use coal energy anymore, then we need to figure out what we can use. So I don't know where we go next. Maybe we'll figure it out. Maybe we have a solution. Maybe we don't. Maybe you have a solution and you want to ask a question. Whatever it is, that's the end of this one. In the next video or the next class or whatever it is it might be, we're going to talk about how coal is actually generated. Hint, it's important. See ya.